eating local food does not always guarantee a lower environmental impact because transportation actually only accounts for less than 10% of a food's total carbon footprint. And its production practices, such as farming methods, land use, and energy-intensive greenhouse heating, that are actually far more significant factors. And this means that locally grown food can have a higher carbon footprint if it's not produced sustainably. So, for example, if you are a big fan of tomatoes, it is best to eat locally grown tomatoes, but only when they're in season in your region instead of consuming imported ones. But when those tomatoes are out of season, you might be better off eating imported tomatoes. So tomatoes grown locally, but out of season, need a lot of energy to keep the greenhouses warm and moist. No, definitely not. And food miles, they're actually defined as the distance that the food needs to travel from production all the way to your plate for consumption. These food miles, they're widely used as a simple metric for environmental impact, but scientific consensus actually suggests that what you eat matters more than where it comes from. So switching to plant-based foods, ideally the ones available in your country or in your area, and plant-sourced protein is considered more beneficial for planetary and individual health. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions around diet and food. So, in fact, the Eat Lancet Commission recommends shifting to the planetary health diet, and this diet is actually considered a flexitarian diet. And flexitarian diets, they're largely plant-based, but they also include some animal-based products as well. And if you want to transition smoothly into this new flexitarian diet, then there's a few tips and tricks you can use. So, for example, you might find it easier to first reduce the portion sizes of your meat intake instead of just chucking it all together. So, for example, instead of consuming a whole chicken breast at dinner, you can try half a chicken breast. And that's already cutting your meat intake in half very easily. Also, if you're overwhelmed with all the plant-based products with fancy names, you don't have to prepare tofu or tempeh immediately. You can also just try plant-based meat alternatives like burgers or schnitzel. That's also fine. It's also a good idea on top of that to increase your legume intake. So instead of making, for example, chile con carne, you could also make chile sin carne. It's the same, but just with extra beans. There's actually a big difference between processed foods and ultra-processed foods. So processing actually includes different methods, and these methods are made for your food to be safe and nutritious. And these methods also include like baking, fermenting, or preserving. But this also means that very simple foods like bread and cheese or yogurt, they are already processed foods. You're not going to eat raw dough for your bread. No, you have to bake it for it to be safe to eat. So these are processed foods already. But ultra processing actually involves industrial formulations, and there's many added ingredients. Some might add sugars, more salt, unhealthy fats or additives and food coloring. And these additions, they're not for your safety, but it's more for your convenience and for long preservation, for example. And it's only these ultra-processed foods that are linked to poor health. So yeah, you can use the package and labels of food to see if the products are healthy, but they only provide a quick overview of the nutrients. So they don't really show the level of processing, ingredient quality, or whether the food is local, sustainable, or seasonal. But yeah, there's a big difference between processed and ultra-processed foods. Yeah, of course not. So the planetary health diet is actually not a one-size-fits-all approach, but it encourages you to adopt a flexible approach, considering your cultural preferences, your nutritional needs, the food systems. So it's not a strict set of rules to follow, but they're guidelines, and these guidelines can just be adjusted to your situation and preference. For example, I know that meat-based dishes are very popular. And that they're tradition, but traditions evolve over time. And who's to say that you can't just make a plant-based stew that it's just as delicious as the meat-based original? So just adapt to your personal preferences and needs.